I'm happiest in the saddle.
A fellow sportsman.
I am an FBI agent!
Great Scott!
What do you say we cut the chit-chat? A-hole!
Dogs and cats living together. Mass hysteria.
Come with me if you want to live.
Hello, and welcome to Retro Ramble. I'm Charlie McGee.
I'm George McGee.
And ladies and gentlemen, this time it's 1981, and we are retro rambling all the way back to check out John Landis's An American Werewolf in London.
Oh.
So George,
yes?
Is it a full moon while we're recording this? How often do you notice, to be honest? Unless it's the summer and you can see it all the time, how often do you track the moon?
I haven't tracked it as much as I used to. That's for sure.
What can people expect from this episode? Because this is obviously, everybody will have probably heard of it. It's a cult classic. But what can people expect us to cover being in terms of what we normally cover? Because this is a Halloween special of sorts.
Yes, it's a Halloween special. Obviously, we don't dip our toes into the horror genre very often. But so I think, yeah, it's obviously a film that you and we don't revisit very regularly. So it was good fun to go back.
I agree.
There's some interesting production chat. I've got sort of lined up
a few suspicious spin-offs.
Some suspicious spin-offs, yeah. It's a landmark film for... I watched this... I've got this as part of a Blu-ray box set, which is...
Collectione.
Of films that defined a decade, so films that defined the 80s. Ironically, there's no films older than 1983 in the box set.
So you got an idea as to when it came out. What are the other films, bro? What are the highlights, the other nine?
It's through Universal, so it's Blues Brothers, which is 1980.
Same film company.
It's American Werewolf, it's The Thing, which is 1981, and Scarface, which is 1983. So it's...
Yeah, but still, quality selections from just a very short period.
I picked it up for only a few pounds, and on Blu-ray and everything. But yeah, I don't think, getting up to 1983 is really defining the 80s, but I say it's a good selection I picked up cheaply. So I'm not entirely sure where I was going with that story.
Many interesting Coulda Wouldas that you can tempt me with. You're not going to tell me until later, but
I'm not. But yeah, it's I say
maybe it's more about the spin-offs this time.
It's Halloween. It's a chance for us to get our horror on, though as per usual, we will just it is a horror comedy. Is it a horror comedy? Is it more horror than comedy?
Horror satire, honestly.
We'll get into it.
For anybody who's listened to our episodes before, you know what to expect. But for anybody who hasn't and has decided to pick this old nugget out as their first try, here's George with a quick disclaimer on some general housekeeping.
So, Retro Ramble is an independent film podcast. Charlie and I are brothers. This podcast is all about Charlie and I going back and revisiting the films of our youth. So that's usually the films of the 80s and 90s. Why we love them so much growing up. Do they still stand the test of time? Have they been remade, homaged, recycled, sequelized, that kind of jazz? So yeah, we're going into these films in detail. So there will be spoilers from the very off. This is a podcast for adults, so there will be some childish language and probably some bad impressions. But we aim to entertain. We aim to give you some background trivia to these films that you may not have been aware of. But we always say it's about revisiting an old friend.
Yeah, let's reminisce and take the piss. So it's American Werewolf. It's 1981. Let's get on this sucker. Enjoy the show.
La 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 la. Isn't this fun? Lovely stroll on the moors. Did you hear that? I heard that. What is it? You think it's a dog? Nice doggy. Good boy.
What happened to them?
Well, the police report said they were attacked by an escaped lunatic.
A wolf. My friend Jack was just here. Ah! told me that I will become a monster in 2 days.
Your dead friend, Jack.
Yes.
Gotta believe me, David.
Believe what? You're one of the undead, and I'm a werewolf.
Tomorrow night's the full moon. You're gonna change.
A what?
You'll become...
I know. A monster.
A naked American man stole my balloon.
What?
What did I do last night?
You don't remember?
The last remaining werewolf must be destroyed. It's you, David.
Run! Good Lord.
So, George, it's 1981. It's Halloween. I'm terrified, but I also want to watch a horror film. So how did we get An American Werewolf in London? Who's responsible for this beast?
American Werewolf in London is from a writer-director and a man we've covered on the podcast in the past year is John Landis. So John Landis is a big name primarily in comedy. So we have covered him in the past year from Coming to America. He's also behind the McGee family favorites, Trading Places, as well as the Blues Brothers. But this was an idea that he had all the way back in 1969. So over a decade before the film got produced, he was 18 years old working as a production assistant on another film that I haven't seen before, but it's a bit of an old favorite, Kelly's Heroes. So it's an old war movie. I think it's got Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
And Donald Sutherland.
Probably seen bits of it.
Yeah, so it's a classic war film. So he was working on that in was the former state of Yugoslavia, and on a long road trip between locations, they stopped on the side of the road, and he saw these local gypsies, and he said it was like something off a movie set in terms of the way these people were dressed, burying a man feet first, and he was wrapped in this cloth and wrapped in streams of garlic. And then he got his local interpreter, the guy driving him, to find out what was going on. And apparently they were burying this guy that way because they feared he might come back to life, back from the dead. And he was just like, "This is nuts, 2 weeks earlier we put a man on the moon, and yet you've still got people believing in these folklore and the supernatural." And that sparked an idea in his head. And he spent a long time working on different films across Europe, spent time in London. He worked from everything from stunts, dialogue coach, an actor. So he spent a lot of time working in London, because he even worked on a draft of The Spy Who Loved Me. So he worked for Eon, and one of his ideas, his script was ultimately rejected, but that was that
because they went with James Bond's going to die.
Oh my God. He had that reference of being an American in London. And so, yeah, he wrote the script around that same time. And he didn't get any support for the idea, because I think at that time, werewolf movies were destined as old hat. Obviously it was part of the
Hammer horror type stuff.
Well, even
that era, not necessarily
even older. Well, Hammer was the 70s, but if you think the classic Universal monsters were the 40s and 50s, I think. And the script itself, like he said, so many people, including Cubby Broccoli, turned it down because everyone was said it's either too frightening to be funny or it's too funny to be frightening. He basically ended up shelving it. During that time, his first his film debut was another comedy horror called Schlock, about a blind girl who falls in love with an ape monster. And on that film, he met a guy who was doing the makeup, a guy called Rick Baker. and
I've heard of him.
And they became good friends and stayed in touch. And he obviously showed him the American Werewolf script, and they worked. You know, they storyboarded.
So he's the makeup guy.
Yes,
Ray.
yeah, he's a legendary makeup guy, and they carried on, like they went off and did their own things. And but in this time, in this 10 years sort of gap, Landis eventually, you know, off the back of this very low budget comedy horror he started getting work. So he did the Kentucky Fried movie, which is I think like a sketch type movie. He really broke through with Animal House.
Of course.
Again, another favorite of the McGee's. Off the back of Animal House, obviously went on to do Blues Brothers as well.
Another classic.
So he had basically established himself as a sort of, you know, a successful director, and finally he had the clout to make American Werewolf. And he said, ironically, you know, by the time he got the green light to do it, werewolves were really hot at that time. So in the same year, there was The Howling, which I'm going to talk about. I've heard of that, yeah. Which is Joe Dante, the guy who did Gremlins.
And Dante's Peak.
So and didn't do Dante's Peak. That's what he calls his penis. So there was The Howling, which is Wolfen, Full Moon High. So there was, it was very zeitgeisty at the time. So yeah, that's the
Full Moon High sounds like Smallville.
Oh God. There's so many bloody. Well, I mean, John Landis refers to Teen Wolf, but obviously that wasn't until 1985.
It's copying a bit of his work.
Yeah. That's the main thing of how it came about. Obviously, I'm going to talk about Rick Baker and his makeup later on.
When was Teen Wolf in comparison to this film, by the way?
So Teen Wolf was 1985. Teen Wolf was, I think, the film Michael J. Fox did before Back to the Future, but I think it was released after the Back to the Future when he became a hot star.
In terms of first memories, once again, the Glendinings. I think I've seen parts of this film, and I think whenever it was advertised on TV, it was on TV a lot during the 80s, you know, whether it was at Christmas or probably every Halloween type thing, they always showed parts of the transformation. You know, it's obviously the iconic scene when it got the Oscar for the makeup work and all of that. So that's all I've seen of that film, and it terrified me from watching it. So as a result, I've never watched this film from start to finish. I've watched loads of bits of it. I've watched a bit of them in the pub, and I've seen a bit of them changing. That is it. I don't think I'd ever seen the amazing ending, which we'll talk about when we get to it. But so I was terrified by it, but I'd seen the whole thing, the whole bit of the transformation. I've seen it all before, and I've definitely seen it all before more, like probably 2 or 3 times, maybe 4 or 5 times, but I've never watched the film. So that's my memory of this film, is aware of it, knowing the best bits, well, some of the best bits of it, but never actually experiencing it. But I was 2 when it came out. So, you know.
Yes, similar thing with me. Yes, it's definitely tied to our good friends and old neighbours, the Glendinings, who had a love of all things, you know, films at the time, but they were big horror fans as well. Bizarrely, I remember watching the very ending, like literally the
alleyway.
The alleyway bit, and
that did seem familiar to me as well. Yeah.
And obviously, as a boy growing up, I think I vaguely remember seeing the shower scene more often than the actual bit. It's like, oh yeah, but we'll get to the shower scene in a bit. It's like, oh, okay, I have to put up with the scary stuff to get to some real boobs.
Some 1980s Caddyshack-worthy boob action. But when George says accidentally, he actually means repeatedly.
And when I say with my friends, I myself.
So, I mean, it's weird. We were obviously very young when it came out, but I think what we're talking about here is the cult classic this film became. I didn't know that it had got the Oscar until I researched this film. I mean, I'm not that. I think one of the other things you and I could cover off in terms of first memories is that we've said it a few times on this podcast, and it's obvious from the films we cover, we're not that into our horror. It's probably because when we were really getting into films, we were young. We were 6, 7, 8 years old. And so we watched the films we enjoyed, and that got us into films. And when we were that age, we weren't really into the horror sort of thing. And I think that stuck with us.
It's funny.
But this is my type of horror film. Yeah,
no, it's a funny one. I think there are film fans, and I think film fans have a certain niche that a certain groove that they find themselves in, and I think it's safe to say
we're not really that art house, are we? Even though we'll watch a good film, we're not that,
Yeah, we like to be entertained, and we like sharing, having fun, and watching a film with a crowd, with friends, and you and I are more of the blockbuster action/comedy leaning because we enjoy that sort of repetition, but it's the same. I
can't see it's like delving into the English patient saying, when Colin crashed his plane into the desert, it was so romantic, George.
That was Ralph Fiennes, goddammit.
Ralph didn't crash the plane. No, but anyway.
I think, but with horror, it's a similar thing. People enjoy that tension, that release. They enjoy watching it with a crowd and with friends, and that there is almost that sort of enjoyment of the scary part's coming, but you don't know exactly when, and you enjoy seeing it with people that haven't seen it before.
But it's the same as like a thriller. Like what you and I are drawn to is we love gripping thrillers and what we read and what we watch. So whether it's the attraction of an Armageddon, like what's going to happen. I mean, before we'd actually seen that film.
We're talking about Armageddon as a thriller.
No, I'm saying that concept, a disaster movie. So we love the Poseidon Adventure with Gene Hackman. We, all of these sort of things. This idea of it's not necessarily a horror, but it's like loads of shit's happening. Like how's it going to end up? Type thing. So we do like
there's loads of actually just thinking there's loads of those disaster movies that we grew up with watching, probably too young, that used to terrify the shit out of me, like the Towering Inferno. We've got to do that at some point.
Because I remember the Poseidon Adventure is
I'm Gene Hackman, goddamn. Oh no, that's Nick Nolte.
We could talk about disaster films all day. Sorry, the point I was only trying to make is I think the same thing that grips people to all those films we're just talking about is why other people like horror. They want the same thing, but with a supernatural spin on it. And why not?
Yeah, exactly. And I think you and I are the same. We're just very picky. We're very fussy about our horror. It either has to be done something different or like something, dare I say it without sounding like a complete knob, intelligent. So
I thought you were going to say high concept.
Well, I mean, it could be high concept, but obviously we talk about for me.
Event Horizon. There's
Event Horizon.
That's an example. Yeah.
Aliens or Alien is, I suppose, Aliens is more action.
Jason X.
Jason X, Jason Statham. No, where was I? But no, it's usually like in terms of rarely we do like an outright horror, and obviously this is a comedy horror. But John Landis's argument was the comedy was to make it more realistic, because the whole principle of turning into a werewolf is so ridiculous. You needed to have that comedy to ground it, I suppose. All this weird shit is happening and someone's like, you gotta be fucking joking, right?
No, but I think that's what I love about this this narration through the script throughout this film, and how it just wouldn't happen today. Because if it was today, it would all be internalized. Like he wouldn't. What's so natural and very reminiscent of the John Landis films is like, yeah, no, my dead friend tells me I'm going to turn into a werewolf in a few days. So like all the way through, she's told what's going to happen. He's like, and it's like, doesn't that sound ridiculous? It's sort of like, this is the narrative. It's like, it couldn't possibly happen. It couldn't possibly happen, but it's teeing it up. Everyone's talking about it. And even the doctor's involved. I thought, whereas in today, it would be a lot more, he wouldn't talk to her. He wouldn't talk to her like that, would he? He would have the visions and everything in a film made today, but you wouldn't have that sort of dialogue.
No, and
not that tongue in cheekness.
And I think that's it. That what I like about this is the dialogue, like, you know, that opening bit where they're dropped off.
The banter between the two lads is great.
They're talking about, is it Debbie Klein or whatever, you know, the girl back home.
It's like, she's horrible. It's like, you're talking about the woman I love. And it's just like...
Yeah, and she's got an amazing body.
It's very Trading Places. It's very... there's lots of that.
And it's weird, though, like, I watched this the other night with my friend Andrew, who's it's one of his favorite films. So, like, you know, he's seen it 1,000 times, but we're both fans of dark, twisted humor and definite shades of the Slaughtered Lamb pub of The League of Gentlemen. They've definitely taken some inspiration from the sort of like, there's nothing for you here.
This is a local pub. Yeah. There is no food here.
Yeah, there's nothing for you, lads. Off on your way. It's like, we didn't burn him. So yeah, there's definitely some influences there, I think.
So for anyone who's not aware of The League of Gentlemen, it's a British comedy from the 90s, and you have to check it out to understand
it's a comedy
set in a very similar location.
Yeah, it's a comedy show, a sketch show, but it also takes its influences from Hammer horror that we've touched on, from stuff like The Wicker Man,
and obviously from this film.
Yeah, and obviously from this. So, but yeah, in that pub, did you spot the cameo?
Well, it's hard to miss. Which cameo are you talking about? Are you talking about the cameo of the legendary Rick Mail, or are you talking about the darts player who would go on to be the little weasel in Gladiator? That weaselly guy in Gladiator who was working with Claudius.
And I also, doing my research, I thought the other darts player, you know, the sort of stick to the road, lads, stick to the road.
Yeah, I think he's a pretty well established British thespian.
He was. He's
no longer with us.
No longer with us. Died at the end of the 90s. But he was one of the voices from the Tetley Tea ads.
No, I can believe that. Yeah, he was.
But yeah, it's a great opening. I mean, the other thing, it just shows my sort of, I don't know, film cynicism, but also northern cynicism when watching it. I don't think I watched it this time around, but I remember watching it in the past, and I was just like, that's not Yorkshire. It's far too mountainous. And obviously at the end it says it's filmed in Wales, but I'm just like, Yorkshire isn't that hilly. But it still looks, it's some great locations.
Yeah, my knee-jerk reaction to that very slow open, very low key sort of open that they've got going on, and then it's like, it's the dreary English countryside, snazzed up by a couple of Yanks.
Yeah.
You know, because just when they arrive, it totally changes, because everything seems like this could be a Monty Python, you know, is that sort of early 80s era. Yeah, okay, what am I watching here? The End of the Life of Brian? No, okay, this is, oh no, they're American. So it I don't know, you know what I mean? It's 1980s Britain, Americans in a film, but that's exotic.
That's something that Landis wanted on purpose. As I say, he'd lived in the UK for a time, and he said, I want to film, I think they filmed it in like February and March. He's like, I want to film in bad weather. I want it to be reflective of what England's like. It's one of those things that you kind of half forget about, because it's obviously, it's an American Werewolf in London, so you kind of, it's something I forgot about when I watched it, you know, for the first time in a long time, a couple of years ago. I was like, oh yeah, it's obviously it's firstly set in Yorkshire, and I don't know if that sort of Yorkshire link or the Moors is a Sherlock Holmes type reference or some sort of.
Well, they talk about Hound of the Baskervilles, which isn't that Conan Doyle?
Yeah, that's Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah,
that's Doyle. So, but I don't know enough of the classic Wolfman, the Lon Chaney Jr. one that John Landis is a huge fan of. But in that one, it is just somebody like running around with the sort of furry hands and slightly furry face on their legs, whereas when John Landis was conceiving this, he's like, no, they have to be a full-blown four-legged beast, like a hellhound type thing.
Yeah, we're gonna need some animatronics.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, in terms of the casting, so David Norton and Griffin Dunne, I've recognised Griffin Dunn he crops up in a bunch of stuff like in the 80s and has done a bit of film and TV. David Norton, I don't think, I quickly checked his IMDb. He's done a lot of... He's had steady work, but I don't think I've seen him in anything
TV
else.
Okay.
Yeah, mainly TV.
I think he's very good in this, though, David Norton. I thought... One, he's a big guy. He's well built. I mean, he's in Billy Bullock, so you get to see all of him. No, but I mean, he's big, so I mean, it's believable. It's like he's not imposing and muscly and threatening, but the fact that he's turning into a wolf, it's like, oh, it's not going to be.
I think he handles the comedy stuff better than the serious stuff. Like, there's this like bits when he's like, we're probably jumping ahead, but I'm not overly sold on the romance in this story. It's very sort of convenient. It's very quick.
George, this is how life was in London in the late 70s and early 80s.
I'm totally in love with you. I mean, I'd understand why you would be in love with Jenny Agutter, because she's very lovely.
The lovely.
And she's in love with him because I'm very attracted to you, but you're also a little bit sad.
Yeah, that's deep. No, but she doesn't actually say "I love you" till the very end. Anyway, we'll get to that. So, but he's the one who's out of the box going, "I love you," and he's like, "Okay, yeah, it's the guy who's just turned up, the American Paris. He's like dashingly handsome, and well, you can come and stay at my place." Yeah, so it is what it is. It can go that way. I guess
she's a whore.
No, she's hot. She's hot for him. Seriously hot for him.
But you also have to. I love in this is I think I'd like to say the hardest working doctor in the UK.
I mean. Is he going to expense that trip?
I'm terribly interested in your case, so I'm willing to drive to Yorkshire and back in a day in the 80s. I'm like, logistics, driving to Yorkshire in the early 80s from London. That's going to take you 6 hours.
I just couldn't. At least it was just where I said, I was in East Proctor earlier today. He also talks like a bit like the Cary Grant type era, because Louise and I, gone back and watched this. Have you ever noticed that in these films everyone talks like that? Isn't that fascinating? This is how we tell a joke. It's just like he does talk a bit like that.
He's very RADA trained.
Yeah, that's RADA training, isn't it?
Yes, David. Very the young American. But yeah, there's the.
What I loved about his introduction is, are you going to talk about the scene where he's on the phone to his wife?
Yes.
Go for it. No, you go. I'm assuming it's his secretary.
Well, he's just like
be a good girl.
Yeah, no, he's just like, well, just tell him indisposed. Tell him I'm dead. Tell him I'm dead.
Yeah.
But I love that scene with the police inspectors, and you've got
what's going on with them? Who came up with this dynamic? I mean, I guess it was zany and people giggled at the time, but
it's not. It's an interesting.
It's very horror film-esque comedy. It's uncomfortable. It's foolish stuff. The guy knocking over the kidney dishes in his office and stuff.
But it's also quite British in a way.
Yeah.
It's not, Landis has done, Animal House, and that can be accused of being, the first sort of gross out comedy and obviously paving the way for Porky's and American Pie and everything. This feels quite quirky sort of British humor in a way, and I don't know if that's just because, again, him spending quite a bit of time in the UK,
in London,
in London town. So yeah, I mean, I love the we talked about the dynamic between David and Jack, and I just love Jack's appearances. They're so grotesque. The makeup is amazing on Jack, with that first sequence where he meets him in the hospital and he's, can I have a bit of toast? And he's just like being like slashed a bit, and he's just got that
still so fresh,
and that dangling bit of flesh as he talks. It's just it's disgusting.
No, I was so impressed.
But it's that brilliant juxtaposition of, it's so disgusting, but they're just having this matter of fact conversation.
Yeah. And he's like going, I'm obviously going fucking crazy. And Jack's actually being very serious, like, dude, I've got a message for you. This is what's going to happen. You need to listen to me. He's like, I'm dead. I'm talking to a ghost. So it's, they're both trying to say, they're both not understanding each other, but yeah, he just gets better and better. And these are the bits I forgot. As I say, we keep coming back to the fact that, I mean, we're there, aren't we? We're talking about the makeup already. The transformation scene. I don't know. Is there a short note, a better word to describe this scene?
No. I've got it down as the transformation sequence. So, Landis always in his, like I say, he storyboarded it. He worked on it with Rick Baker over the years, and he always wanted it to be in bright light with no cutaways, because in the old werewolf movies they would be like,
is that a mustache?
Well, that's it. Like they'd be walking, like, you know, go round a tree, and then all of a sudden come out like
and the hair's been put on the hands in stop motion the wrong way round.
Yeah, exactly.
That sort of stuff. Yeah,
that sort of
classic
stuff.
Horrors. Yeah.
And he'd worked up this method with Rick Baker, and then when it came to getting the film greenlit, he calls up Rick Baker and he's like, "Yep, so we've got the green light for American Werewolf, so you're on." And Rick Baker's like, "I've kind of just signed up for another werewolf movie." And
shock horror.
And John Landis was like, "You haven't told them about the technique we talked about." And he's like, and Landis even, like, in this interview, Landis is telling the story, and he's like, "You motherfucker." Rick Baker had been signed up to do Joe Dante's The Howling, and I haven't seen The Howling. I want to watch it now after reading interviews with Joe Dante and John Landis. So yeah, I think you and I will have to maybe add that to our revelations list.
Revelation.
So Rick Baker, out of loyalty and friendship to John Landis, left The Howling, leaving his protege in charge. And his protege was Rob Bottin. And Rob Bottin would go on to become the makeups guy for The Thing. So he became, renowned makeup.
His own head running about on the floor out of its own volition. Yeah,
makeup extraordinaire, genius.
Just a head with hands and legs coming out of it. What?
So apparently Landis filmed the whole film in sequence to allow Rick Baker as much time as possible to get the makeup and the effects done right. The makeup itself on David took, I think, 10 hours in makeup.
I was going to say at least, yeah.
So, but as you say, it was the first film to earn an Academy Award for Best Makeup. So it was created, in 1981 because there had been, so many groundbreaking, films that had come out and never really sort of Oscars.
Where does apes feature in this makeup chronology?
Well, Planet of the Apes was 1968, and I think.
But of course, use real monkeys.
They use real monkeys. No, I think it lost out to 2001, and I think it was just general special effects. But I think
back then,
I think Planet of the Apes was probably one of those reasons that people were lobbying, saying there should be an Oscar for best makeup.
Visual effects, special effects, makeup effects, lighting, loads of different
lighting, costume design, food catering,
shoe design,
services. Yeah, there's other bits that I sort of want to touch on. I just love how they capture London in this. Like,
the yuppies. Should we talk about the?
Well, that's it. We need to talk about the.
You're so funny, Harry.
Let's give them a vital fright. And those hooligans are outside again. And the great thing about horror is there's lots of themes you can draw out of a horror film. There's very subversive, and you can pick up. You could say it's a comment on Thatcher's Britain in the 80s. You could, it could be a comment from an American on how he felt the UK was. There's even I've seen arguments or an article online saying it's all about werewolves in general are all about puberty. You're growing hair in funny places. But there's even an argument saying it's all about Jewishness, because David is identified quite early on as being a Jew, and that sort of xenophobic sort of treatment. But I think, I love how there's so much British humor in this, or British British-esque humour that's nailed on. And I love that sort of those jolly old Brits that even when they've been absolutely savaged.
Oh, when they're in the cinema. That's
yeah,
brilliant.
and they're like, oh yes, you could get a gun. That would work.
That'd be quick, wouldn't it? All very good. Great seeing the Tube as well. London, well, you and I have never seen, to be honest.
Yes, that's what I loved about watching this film, because I lived in London for over 10 years.
I think my first visit was in the 90s. Do you know what I mean? It was like I never saw this London that's being shot here. Well, just in films and TV.
I mean, there's bits that seem really seem very familiar, like where her flat is. I was assuming, that's around Kensington. But that was filmed around Pimlico. But yeah, it's that's the part that fascinates me, just seeing old London, and we're getting into
seeing the flat that a nurse could get.
the nurse could
Can you imagine telling a nurse
on her
nurse of the nurse same job? Yeah, you could have this. This could be your flat. This type of flat in London. Be like, what?
But yeah, we're getting to the ending. But yeah, the whole that climatic scene at Piccadilly Circus. I mean, I used to work 2 minutes from Piccadilly Circus for over 10 years. So it's bizarre seeing that, and with all the porno theatres, and apparently when John Landis,
they're still there. You just have to look. You have to look for them.
They're just not as obvious. Apparently, when John Landis wrote the script originally, those cinemas at Piccadilly would just show old cartoons. So in his script, it was like David just goes away to watch cartoons. But then when he came back in the late 70s, they'd all turned into porn theatres. So he had to, and part of this, he created this. He actually made a short porno, essentially. So
no, I could tell that he'd made that film.
So yeah,
that's in the film. Yeah.
So that film, See You Next Wednesday, is a bit of a running joke. It crops up in loads of John Landis's films. So it crops up in Trading Places, Coming to America, and Blues Brothers. So yeah, it was always like a joke, but then he was like, yeah, I need to use a porn film, and he said some of them were so awful. He's like, I'm just going to make my own. I'm just going to hire a few people, and apparently that was the first thing they filmed. But yeah,
get it out of the way.
It's the music and everything.
It's a classic.
To get access to
get away from porn, get back on.
Get away from porn. Filming in Piccadilly Circus is very difficult, and
must have cost them a few shillings.
Well, the way John Landis did it was through bribery. So he essentially set up a free screening of the Blues Brothers for over 300 members of the London Metropolitan Police Force, and then after that, he's like, so, would you guys be up for me filming Piccadilly? Oh yeah, I'm sure we can arrange that for a few hours. So I think it literally filmed in the middle of the night. I think they were able to stop Piccadilly Circus for 5 minutes at a time to set up the shots.
But now that sort of thing happens a lot for films.
Oh yeah, but still,
Transformers shutting down parts of Newcastle.
Oh well, all that jazz. I think at the time it was quite groundbreaking for the access that they got, and for the eagle-eyed people in there. John Landis is he actually, I say he used to be a former stuntman in his youth, and he is one of the people that gets run over into one of the shops at Piccadilly Circus.
I was going to say that some people are properly or their stunt doubles or their dummies are properly run over. It's very graphic escalation. Yes, there's carnage.
There's heads rolling. There's cars flipping. It's great. And if anything, it almost feels. I don't know about you, but it almost feels a bit anti-climax. It ends very suddenly, doesn't it?
No, but it was like, I think you've got to be fair. Where else is it going to go? I think some stories, I think it's the story that's aware of it. It's like, what would actually happen in London? You're in central London. How would it be? We're not talking about Kong here. It's not like, oh my God, he's unstoppable. It's running about enough guys with enough guns. That's how it starts. It's set up at the beginning.
Punishment.
That a group of Yorkshire men with their shotguns take it out. And it's got to be that same sort of thing again. So how far could it get? He has 2 nights at it. It's not like it's the first night and it's over. He has one night and then you get to see the whole cycle of it. The brilliant comedy of him in that jacket, stealing from the zoo, waking up and all that sort of stuff.
Oh yeah, we forgot about that. An American man stole my...
An American man, yeah. I'll give you £2. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of that, and I think it's just not greedy. I think obviously today there'd be a longer origin, there'd be a build up. Probably wouldn't be two film thing for this type of thing. No, but I just think I know what you mean, but it's kind of like, where else could it have gone?
No, but I there's part of me that loves how abruptly it ends. It just ends. He's shot, and then it's like that really upbeat rendition of Blue Moon, ba 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 ba, and again, it's a very tragic ending.
But where else could it go? And also, I think a lot of horror films are like that. It was later on when we used to get the hand moves again. I'm not dead. He's not dead.
I mean, I just want the hardest working doctor to turn up and just be like, so anyway, I'm just going to take some samples. I'm just going to put them in my car.
That sounds... I'm just going to pop up to Yorkshire. I'll be back tomorrow.
Back to Yorkshire.
That would be a brilliant spin-off.
Yes, indeed. Well, we haven't done. We haven't let in Jeff and Celine.
Are they able to feature in this? I'm just not sure. Anybody else?
Very briefly.
Okay, let's see what they got to say.
Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could that they didn't stop to think if they should.
So Coulda Woulda Shoulda is where George enlightens us into actors, directors, cast members, crew members, whatever, who was considered for this film but didn't make the final cut. So George.
So fairly unsurprisingly, Coulda Woulda Shoulda on this one, considering it's John Landis. But apparently the guys producing this, and I noticed this when their names came up, I was like, I didn't realise these guys produced it, but it's produced by John Peters and Peter Guber, who made 1989's Batman.
Of course.
And also the amazing Tango and Cash. So they were pushing to have the two Americans cast as none other than Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi. So Dan Aykroyd playing the role of David and John Belushi playing the role of Jack. But John Landis refused because he wanted new faces. He wanted essentially like nobody to play them. That's my Coulda Woulda Shoulda.
So that's a short one. That was a really short Coulda Woulda Shoulda. Okay, so as I said before, spin-offs. This is a cult classic film. I know there's been at least one sequel. What other spin-offs have there been?
So there's quite... I'm being a little bit tenuous here, but there's a very important spin-off to this because there was one person that watched this film that was I'm just your biggest fan, John. I'm your biggest fan. And it was none other than a small little boy trapped in a man's body called Michael Jackson.
Oh.
And 2 years later, he was like, I want to make... I've got this new album coming out. And he wanted to make a really big, impressive music video. So who did he hire? John Landis. And who did he hire to do the makeup? Rick Baker. So without American Werewolf in London, you wouldn't have the Thriller music video.
Wow. And I think that's the closest I got to watching American Werewolf in London was just Thriller video again.
Because I say MJ was a big fan. He was a big fan of horror films. So there was a belated late 90s sequel. I think it was 1997. I'm sure you've seen it because it's set in Paris, Charlie. An American Werewolf in Paris. I haven't seen it. I remember it coming out around the time. And on Rotten Tomatoes, I know that's not always the best, most accurate gauge, but it has an average rating of 7%. Or 3.7 out of 10, with the critical consensus reading markedly inferior to its cult classic predecessor in every way. American Werewolf in Paris is felled by the silver bullets of clumsy storytelling and chintzy special effects. And I think they did that classic late 90s thing of, hey guys, we could do anything in CGI, right?
Everything will look believable. Yeah.
You've seen Jurassic Park? Well, we haven't got that budget, but we'll do it anyway. And it was also nominated for Worst Sequel at the Stinkers Bad Movies Award, but lost to Speed 2 Cruise Control.
Worst episode ever.
John Landis was originally approached to do a sequel. He pitched an idea, and the guys who had the rights were like, "No, we're going to go with something else." And John Landis said, he goes, "I was really disappointed when I saw that film. I thought it was lousy." But most recently, I think it was about 5-10 years ago now, Max Landis, John Landis' son, was announced as writing a remake. But then I think a couple of years later, Max Landis, son of John Landis, was accused of various inappropriate sexual misdemeanors and has been cancelled. So I don't think that's happening anymore.
He's spending the rest of his life in jail. So, okay, that was a very cheerful, suspicious spin-offs. Are there any other spin-offs that we haven't covered, George?
Well, I mean,
there's probably a comic. There's probably...
there was a BBC radio adaptation not that long ago where I think in the late 90s, where they reunited a lot of the cast, and apparently that was quite good. So, there was a radio basically play version of it that dialed up the comedy. But I think it's safe to say this film has paved a way for a lot of horror comedies in terms of, I think, as we talked about in Ghostbusters, horror comedies, it's a hard balance to get, of it's got to be funny, it's got to be scary. And I think this film does it brilliantly. Oh my God, I've just realized we haven't talked about the werewolf Nazis.
I was going to be saving that for anything else. Yes, let's have a segue for the Demon Nazi Death Squad. So let's just talk about the dream sequences in general, because you've got that one that always sticks out of me that you see in a lot of compilation videos. They show that scene where his face is in full makeup, where his eyes are it's still him.
Yeah. In the bed.
Yeah, in the bed. That's a classic that you see all the time when people say 80s horror. That shot always features.
So yeah, I was watching this the other night with my mate Andrew, and about halfway through, it was quite late on, and halfway through, a mutual friend who lives around the corner was like, "Oh, you guys still up, still about? Shall I pop over?" And we're just watching a film, but pop over. He comes over, and he's never seen American Werewolf before, and it's just as that sequence is about to start, and he's like, "So bring me up to speed." So it's just like, well, the guy's, he's been bitten, he's turned into a werewolf, and he's freaking out about it. And we're like, and now this bit's going to really fuck you up. And we just played it, and he was just like, what the fuck is this?
What are you watching?
And it's such a gonzo, crazy dream sequence. You've got
cheese dream. But it is something like the Mighty
brutal.
Bush.
It's a fact that when his mother gets shot, she's properly pulled away, yanked.
And he's held at knife point. He's held at knife point for the whole thing, and then his throat is slit. It's
it's so intense, bizarre, twisted, and then it's the kicker though. It's that dream within a dream of, oh, don't be silly, David.
I'll just open the window. Oh my God. That's where the horror's turned up to 11, and this film really works. I was just like, yeah, I like that sort of stuff. It's silly, it's shocking.
It's obviously, it's playing on his psyche.
Surreal as fuck.
It's just fucking Nazi werewolf soldiers. I mean, obviously that's a film in itself, but
it's better than Space Ninjas. I'm sorry to say, George.
Whoa, careful on that.
I know it's your pet project.
That's my big movie idea: Space Ninjas in space.
Space Ninjas : Ninjas in space.
Ninjas in space. So yeah, it's. I think we've said everything we need to. It is a cult.
I think
classic.
we've done it justice. I mean, I can't say enough how still today, we can take the piss out of 90s CGI because they hadn't really got the hang of it, and I think we forget that just before the birth of CGI, and we're still going back to today. When the recent Star Wars film came out, they tried to do more physical stuff. They recognized that the audience, some of it looked better, and I think this was the height of it, and it's that transformation scene still looks brilliant today, whether you say about all the trickery that's going on, shot for shot, the progression of it, the believability of it, it's phenomenal. It's amazing. Even now with everything they can do, you don't think that anything they can do today, I'm sure they can, but they haven't yet, because this has already been done. It doesn't need to be redone, but it's so real looking, it's so gritty. And as I say, in the light that, and
it's an amazing achievement, and the fact, that hats off to John Landis for sticking with that vision of I want to do it in bright light, no cutaways. I want to see everything. Yeah, it is phenomenal. Whereas you look at similar era, and we've talked about it earlier as The Thing and Rob Bottin's work. It's some amazing, some of the best practical effects done in that, but there's a lot that's hidden in darkness and smoke.
But honestly, I think it's going to come full circle. If you look at where drones are going, the fact that they can shoot places and they never could do before with drones, and what they're able to do with lighting and what they're able to do with smoke, I could see it going full circle where parts of the stage will come alive. You see what they're doing with The Mandalorian? It was screens, it was physical stuff in the room. Who's to know that this sort of makeup-y stuff, that stuff could have jackets that change color and stuff. It could go more physical, is my point. Is that I think that CGI was kind of a stepping stone, but it was not the answer.
Yeah, and you get stuff like The Dark Knight, where it's Harvey Two-Face, where it's a mixture of practical effects and CGI to sort of fill in the gaps and stuff like that. And that's what we've talked about in previous episodes. Terminator 2, Jurassic Park, everyone thinks of them as being groundbreaking CGI, but there was so much practical and animatronic stuff that was being done.
Yeah. No, I really enjoyed watching this film. I said my type of horror film. I like the comedy. I like the blend. It still stands up for all of the same reasons that it has in the past. And I'm glad that we've got to cover it here on Retro Ramble. So, George, what anything else you want to bring up? Obviously follow us on all the social media channels, on our YouTube, on Spotify. We're on all the places you get your podcasts.
Yeah, please like, subscribe. If you have the time, please leave us a review on iTunes, because it pushes up in that visibility in iTunes, means we're more visible to more people.
And Patreon is coming. We're just making sure that
the magic is coming. The magic is coming.
If you book them, they will come. We are just making sure that we are brimming with extra tidbits to make it worthwhile, and that we can continually add enough to make it something that people really will get something from. So we're almost there, but
watch this space
very much. And in terms of what we've got coming up next, we've done Halloween, so what have we got coming up next? Probably just
believe we are spoiling our dear listeners, because there is a new director's cut of Rocky IV coming out. So we are going to look at the original cut of that, I believe. Or we might just cut out this bit of audio and decide on something else.
Rocky IV, there you have it. 2
Stallones in 1 year, 2 Arnie films in 1 year. We are showering our listeners with the goods.
And there's still plenty more to go to look forward to. So
I'm alive, it's still alive.
And we can talk a little bit about what's going to be coming in the next year in terms of the extras that'll be on Patreon, the Retro Ramble Revelations, where we go back and cover films that slip by us, that we didn't watch from start to finish, that our listeners have recommended. So there's lots of very exciting stuff on the way. But thank you for listening to this episode. I've been Charlie McGee.
I've been George McGee.
And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.